quarter of the metro area, so we look forward to enjoying this time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you also, Perimeter Business Alliance, for sponsoring today's lunch. We have some of the leading minds of transportation with us today to help us figure out our next step. And I actually believe we have some reasons to feel optimistic about the future. But we're going to go both to what we feel good about and where we still need to do some work. So on that note, I would like to first introduce Heather Al-Hadaf is the president of Center Forward, an Atlanta-based firm dedicated to resolving land use and transportation challenges. But Heather also is a person who put together what I think is still a baseline plan of Connect Atlanta. How can we connect Atlanta? And it was not just connecting Atlanta with streets, but for pedestrians, for cyclists, for transit. And the whole idea of creating connections is something that I think we'll hear a lot about. Becky Katz is the City of Atlanta's first ever Chief Bicycle Officer. And I have to say, I was Atlanta's first bicycle planner as an intern when I was in graduate school. We've come a long way. No, you don't want to thank me. It was changing sewer grates was a victory there. She focuses on Atlanta's efforts to achieve national recognition as a bicycle-friendly community and a top 10 U.S. cycling city. And we can ask her, where are we now? We're not even on the list, right? Okay, all right. Okay, Paul Morris, President and CEO of Atlanta Beltline, Inc., which is the public side. Keith is pointing there to his folk. Developing the most comprehensive revitalization effort in the history of Atlanta and one of the largest urban redevelopment projects in the United States. I don't think I have to say much about the Beltline. Everybody knows the Beltline. We even have, do we say the godfather, the father, the birther, or something of the Beltline here, right? Birther. Like that. It actually is Kathy Willard's birthday today, so she's maybe the birther, co-birther. Okay, we'll get that. Paul has had a long storied career as a landscape architect and as a planner of public spaces, and we're lucky to have him in Atlanta. In fact, we're lucky to have all of you here. Keith Parker has become kind of a star in his time here. General Manager and CEO of MARTA. He oversees the 9th largest transit system in the country, recently was appointed to the National Infrastructure Advisory Council by President Obama. If y'all have ever read me, I always follow the 9th largest transit system in the country with the line that, and the largest transit system in the country that receives no regular operating support from its state. So, yeah. No. I like that, though. Yet. Maybe I need to add that. Okay, yeah, well, maybe that's one of the challenges we need to do. Okay, so, and before coming to Atlanta, Keith was running transit operations in San Antonio, and before that, our sister city, younger, smaller sister city of Charlotte. And then Chris Tomlinson. Chris Tomlinson, and I don't know how you've managed to do this, I'm getting 2 paychecks. No. He is Executive Director of the State Road and Tollway Authority, which is a revenue-producing transportation entity in our state. And the goal and the potential, you mean all those dollars that people pay on the hot lanes that just go up and spend? Anyway. His other hat, he also is Executive Director of the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority, which was established under the administration of Roy Barnes as a way to help resolve a lot of our regional transportation issues. it's had various evolutions depending on who's in charge, but the entity and its legal powers are still there to help address transit on a regional basis. And you also run the Georgia Transportation Infrastructure Bank, revolving infrastructure investment fund that awards grants and provides loans to fund transportation projects. So we've got, from the core city perspective, we've got the regional perspective, and we have people who have been immersed in this topic. I would like each of y'all to talk from your point of view for a minute about where you see Atlanta, and let's talk about the region and how the city of Atlanta may relate to the region, and what challenges we face, opportunities we face. Have we gone one step forward, 2 steps back, or 2 steps forward, 1 step back? Or maybe we've just gone many steps forward. So Heather, I'm going to have you start.
Well, I'm going to say we've come very, very, very far. And as a native, I've been obviously impacted by a lot of decisions of leaders in the past. It's been wonderful to help be a part of any teams and leadership that's going on now. I would like to thank seniors and millennials. And what I mean by that is being being transit dependent myself. I used to be a freak of nature pretty much everywhere I went. Now that's not as common, but what I've found in my work on the private side is there are now more people of different demographic groups or different geographies that have a shared experience. So before it was just those that need transit, then it's somebody that had a soccer injury and had to take the train all of a sudden and relied on it and realized the value. For seniors, my parents are sandwiched in taking care of my grandparents, which I'm lucky to have them at 90 plus each. And that's wonderful, but there's their needs, and then there's the millennials and their needs. But both of those experiences, I've heard a lot of people, maybe in the boomer generation, the leadership that traditionally, again, didn't quite understand why these things were, how they were relevant to them. They knew they were important, they heard about the dialogue, but they couldn't actually say how it meant to them. And I've heard more and more of them come back and say, I took my kid to college and they demanded this and they didn't want the car and I didn't have to pay. And so there's real life experiences happening to people that are some of the key leaders right now. So I think those experiences with the seniors and millennials especially has helped open the eyes of a lot of people that now we have a shared story. Now we have a shared understanding of a need, whereas before it was us and them. And I'd love it if we could get past urban and suburban dialogue, because even the city of Atlanta has a lot of suburban settings. So I wish we would maybe focus on urban-like area or denser or less dense area instead of this us and them, because I think that's been a dividing factor.
Knows there are many areas in the suburbs that have town centers and very dense urban-like environments.
So I think it would be great, maybe one little takeaway, if people could start using that kind of less dense area, more dense, whatever your choice is, but less us and them.
We'll get into the reality too, though, in terms of transit in the suburbs versus in the core. So, Becky.
Hey, hi everybody, it's really wonderful to be here. I think from my position and where I sit in the city, this is the best time that I could have been hired and do the work. We have a lot of our CID support in here who have been major leaders in transforming our streets, along with how the Beltline is working and how MARTA is starting to think about last and first mile connectivity. Our bike lanes and our bike infrastructure on street was pretty static across the country for a long time. We defaulted to share roads, which are just those little share the road symbols, which, you know, maybe they make us feel better, but they don't actually have any real safety factor. To where we went to a 4-foot bike lane minimum, and then just the design and engineering of what facilities look like for people who ride bikes and pedestrians has just grown and expanded, and we're starting to see that. Now, we do not yet have a fully connected bike network, so we have troubling spots still, but as the network gets built, and it's very well accepted that we can do these types of projects, right? We have protected facilities on the ground. And so as we grow that, I think, and as the Beltline grows and more multi-use paths grow, ridership will go up for bikes, ridership on transit will go up as that adds to the connectivity. And I think it's a really great time. And there's also a lot of funding opportunities right now, and so for transportation, and we're having a lot of these types of conversations. So I think we're really primed to be even better bike city.
And I know that ARC is, and why don't y'all hold that, because I want this to be as much as possible when we go through the line, a conversation, and so that you two can be sweet and talk to me. Yeah, but the ARC is working on a regional bicycle and pedestrian plan. So again, it's not just a City of Atlanta thing, but an idea of how do we lace together all our different networks so that we do have options other than driving the car or other than transit as well. Mr. Beltline, how do you like that?
Well, good afternoon, everyone.
And I'm scared, he's got a mic to himself, and at times I'm gonna just have to say, Paul?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, we're good. Okay.
Actually, Maria was one of the first folks from the press corps who interviewed me when I came 3 years ago. And what was interesting is one of her big questions was, why here, why now? Why would you, after a career of getting to work on projects that were exciting and big and audacious in both transportation mobility and in placemaking, choose Atlanta to come to? And I think the good story around that is a growing sensitivity and appreciation for complete communities. And the notion is that you got to start with great bones. And Atlanta has those. An extraordinary history, extraordinary basic infrastructure. Some of it a little brittle on the bones, but much of it in place. And extraordinary communities and neighborhoods and places that can achieve that quality placemaking that ultimately results in complete communities. And the Beltline for me was what many cities around our country could only dream of. And not only is it the infrastructure and the transit and the trails and the streets and the parks and housing and jobs that everyone believes in, it's this notion that a city and region would come together in the first place around uniting 45 neighborhoods in a culture that had historically done just the opposite by design and chosen to come together. And when you do that, what we see in our work every day is that we change the way we think about our work. So we'll never be done. We're always in the process of being mindful of what it takes to be complete so that everybody benefits from what we're doing and that it brings everybody together in a way that nurtures community over time. And that's why we have conversations with the farthest reaches of our region about what the Beltline is. We meet with the governor and his staff about what the Beltline's doing. We go to Washington, D.C., and we meet with federal agencies about the model that Atlanta as a region has taken on to try to inform how the rest of the country informs how it builds itself out. So a lot of what we do is about finishing the job. It's about taking what we've got to work with and making it better, repairing places that are broken, filling in the gaps, and finding ways to enrich communities at the neighborhood level, right, at the block level, where the connections weren't made, where the bike lanes and sidewalks are either missing or broken, and also finding ways to create those unexpected, as we often call it, casual ways for people to come together. And that's what the beauty of the Beltline is in many ways, is it's a destination as much as it's a transportation facility. And while it started with trails, and it's getting to start building streets and bridges, and it's now looking at building transit, those are just the layers that ultimately realize the potential for everybody to achieve optimal personal mobility. But that's also a place where people gather, and it is where we come together.
Good afternoon, and I have to acknowledge two board members here, Bob Dallas and Jim Durant, as well as some members of my team, of the Mara team. So I'll do a quick.
Yeah, Chris Tomlinson's also on your board, right?
But he's standing here, so he's not,
Yeah.
he can't be my boss while he's up on stage.
Okay.
And by the way, I have to mention this. Maria's a very progressive person, but she segregated this group.
I did not think
And she put the good-looking bald guys on this end of the table and really have to mix us up. You shouldn't have. Where is that from me? Like I said, we got the good-looking bald guy. So I'll just do a quick contrast, though. You asked where things are and where they're going. So I'll just go back a few years. 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, MARTA was basically agency in crisis. We had just finished another fiscal year of multi-million-dollar deficits. We were projecting, this was done by KPMG, they projected we would lose $33 million the fiscal year we were in, that was fiscal 12. And we were midway through it. Our ridership was down amongst the highest percentages in the entire country, 5 consecutive years of ridership losses. We had raised fares more than just about any other transit authority in the nation. And the public perception of the group was such that we do an analysis of our media coverage, and the one that had just been done for the previous 6 months was somewhere in the neighborhood of 8-to-1 negative articles to positive articles, that if you had to purchase that coverage, it would have been $3 or $4 million worth of negative coverage that we were getting for free. The TIA vote had just happened that previous 6 months, and most of you know places, for example, like Clayton County, had voted against TIA by a 2-to-1 margin. And at the state legislature, they literally were contemplating legislation that would have severely restricted my ability, the board's ability, to even run the authority. And we heard constantly how bad the transit system was being operated and how it was a detriment to Atlanta. And you fast forward, and we have just finished up a 4th year now. We will close out this fiscal year. Instead of going where KPMG predicted where we would be fiscally bankrupt in a 3 or 4 year period, we'll finish up this fiscal year with a rainy day fund in excess of $200 million. Our ridership is of the 12 largest transit authorities, all are seeing ridership declines, just about all of them, except us. We are in that small group who's seeing a small increase because of gas prices. There's a direct correlation in transit. Gas prices go down, ridership goes down with it. Gas prices go up, goes down. But amongst those 12 largest systems, we have the healthiest ridership. Our public perception, and Lau Harris, our media guy, he's here, and one of the things he's done is help cultivate a better relationship with the media. And the most recent one shows 8-to-1 margin. We have positive news stories to negative. And we had a vote about 1.5 years ago now, Clayton County, again, who just 3.5 years ago voted resoundingly against joining TIA, against the TIA vote by a 3-to-1 margin, agreed to join MARTA as a full partner, paying a full penny of sales tax. And just this most recent legislative session, we received, for the first time, I believe, since the early 90s or so, the opportunity to go out for a vote, and the citizens of Atlanta will have the chance to pay an additional sales tax to see some substantial increases in transit service. So I would say we are moving in the right direction, but there's much, much more to do.
Keith, on a personal level, you were saying when you came here, it was like you were, I don't want to use the word toxic, or MARTA was viewed somewhat in a toxic light. And how would you describe what you have witnessed on a personal level, not and how people are receiving MARTA?
Well, on an agency level as well. Another piece of the story was when the board, when it came out that the board was considering me along with another candidate or two, the chair of the MARTOC committee, the group that oversees MARTA, came out publicly saying that MARTA, don't consider that guy from San Antonio. Don't hire him, or you'll have a tougher time in the legislature. So talk about a welcome to Atlanta. And also,
we can talk about where he is now.
No, but he's become, and to be fair, he's become a very big supporter of MARTA, and so we appreciate that. And we've seen a sea change in the way people perceive the agency from an economic development standpoint. My buddy Mark Torres over here, and I remember hearing Mark give a talk about how just 5 or 6 years ago, developers tried not to mention MARTA when talking about doing major developments, and now, if you're not talking MARTA, you're sort of out of the game. And I think, you're paraphrasing me a bit, but I think that captures much of what you say. So where Mercedes-Benz and State Farm and many of these other agencies like to mention us as a part of why they're making their relocation decisions to this Atlanta market, that shows, I think, a great deal in terms of our progress.
Chris,
I always end up following Keith. It's tough.
change your name.
I think there's no question that we've moved forward and we're continuing to move forward. There is a true momentum right now. There was a time where, to Keith's point, where talk of transit was always in a negative light or a very fairly sort of divisive light, and that's not the case today. I think there's multiple reasons for it. Some people are just finally getting on the bandwagon of how critical, meaningful public transit is. Some people are focused on its importance because of the ties to economic development. For me, it's any combination of those things. And there's also just, I think, an evolution in everyone's approach and thinking. You know, we used to talk about transportation generally in terms of these very different modes. Are we talking roads and bridges, or are we talking public transit? In public transit, are we talking bus, or are we talking rail? And then eventually maybe somebody would talk about bikes and pedestrians. Now, it is a lot of connectivity. It is a connected ecosystem in the broadest sense. It's not about roads and bridges or public transit. It's about the connections between the two. And honestly, my particular position, I think, was created because of that. I'm not just the state's toll guy or the state's transit guy. It's about mobility and moving people and goods from point A to point B. And we're starting even within the industry, amongst the transportation professionals, we're starting to talk a little bit less about specific types of trips. Again, car trips, and start talking about journeys, because at the end of the day, somebody's trying to get from their doorstep to a final destination. That's where the last mile connectivity comes up. So for me, it's a very exciting time because I feel that at the state level, I have an opportunity to help shape and certainly participate in that conversation in all of these roles. And I really, on a day-to-day basis, it's less and less different hats. It's trying to bring these multiple perspectives into view at one place and at one time. And at the very least, by me being the head of two agencies, I've made meeting scheduling a little bit easier. And honestly, it's part of the communication. There's a lot of things that were happening where the right hand didn't know what the left hand is doing. And so we're starting to do more and more planning across the board. So I'm excited, but I think there's no question that we're moving forward.
And maybe this is the right question to ask you. As our region has become subdivided into more and more cities and have counties, some during the Peace Clause would describe being transit counties and non-transit counties. How do you look at the whole region, and is there ever a way that we can actually create a transportation system that includes all the multiple modes into a region-wide way?
So I think that's a great question, and I think the answer begins and ends with try to look at it from the customer's view and the commuter's view. A lot of what Keith and I talk about, some of the other agency officials we deal with, is at the end of the day, that commuter really doesn't care what branch of government it is that they're trying to get from point A to point B. And what we've found is by focusing on that commuter, that rider, then what are the roles that our respective agencies or operations play, and how can we make it more regional or more seamless? It's everything from what are our policies for entrenchment from one system to the other, to how can we consolidate and move towards use of the breeze system. So it's it's seamless and customers don't have to think. And I think that'll be the key to us continuing to become and make it more of a true regional system. Obviously, one of the things that in many ways I have the luxury of is the ability to operate across county jurisdictional lines. If you were to step back 5 or more years ago, that was actually seen by a lot as a threat because the state could do this.
And the express process covers what region?
So we operate in, well, Retta's jurisdiction is 13 counties. We actually have 30 park and ride lots in 12 counties. But we draw ridership from over 44 different counties. And you know, you hear a lot about the past of how Retta was created, what it could do, but you hear very little about what actually happened. We were able to work with Clayton County to start up their initial service, C-Tran, in partnership with MARTA, who served as the operator. So instead of all this jurisdictional fighting, we leveraged the powers and abilities and skill sets to deliver something for the customers. And a lot of people don't know that history, and that's okay. Because at the end of the day, if you were a Clayton County resident, you had transit. And if kudos to you if you could figure out what the state's role was versus Clayton County's versus MARTA's, but in the end, they were just trying to get from point A to point B.
But in the end, no one wanted to pay operating, and C-Tran ended. And so that talks about one of the issues that we have as we go forward is how do we not only build our transportation network, but how do we operate it? And when MARTA was looking to expansion this year, it really wanted Fulton, DeKalb, and the city of Atlanta to go for the extra half penny. And I ended up writing a column calling it micro-regionalism. They could only get that through for this election cycle in the city of Atlanta, where transit is embraced. What do we still need to do? I'm thinking Cobb, I'm thinking Gwinnett, I'm thinking, you know, Paulding and Coweta, and, you know, to really create a system that serves the whole region and where we have money that is not, as you said, node specific, because right now the gas tax is totally limited to roads and bridges. So how can we overcome the hump and really create a regional transportation system, you know? And because this can be a conversation too. I mean, y'all jump in.
I think it's really important to talk about the trip types and the trip purpose, because different parts of the region have different needs. And so in some of the suburban areas, the aha moment for some people has been, well, I used to be just worried about the park and ride opportunity on Holcomb Bridge Road, but now I can't take Holcomb Bridge Road on Saturday to get to the grocery store. So things that were, you know, it was already unacceptable for the work trip, but mentally I think Atlantans were used to that. Now we're talking about all trip types and different times of day, and what does that mean, and how does that hinder our livelihood if we can't build in our recreational or doctor visits or whatever else it may be. So I think understanding the needs by area, what's most immediate and what type of service we need, is probably better than everybody picking light rail versus streetcar versus I'm going to debate you on heavy rail, because that's a classic human thing to go into the nuances. But I don't think we've been able as a region to share an understanding of what are the core basics that we need, what type of service, how frequent is it, you know, what parts of the region are you trying to connect to. But the bottom line is, it's also the design of projects, and that's something that nobody in this region ever talks about. We talk about winning the money, and we get the money, but then it's also that design at the very, very local level, which Paul, from an implementation standpoint, you understand that. So I think it's really understanding each part of the region and where they're at on their growth and acceptance of these different needs, and then maybe tailoring and focusing on those. But again, talking about us as a whole and collective, and understanding that while we may be saying just the city is going to vote this fall, I think we would be remiss if we all continued sharing that story as just the city, because when the highway system was built in just the city, that was part of a whole system that everybody is using. So it is still going to be an investment by citizens of the city of Atlanta, hopefully, that everybody in the region is going to benefit from. So
Well, I mean,
think
that,
those
hasn't that
yeah.
been the story of MARTA from day one?
Yeah.
The whole region, in fact, the state's benefited by 2 counties investing in a transit system. But they haven't necessarily, yes. Yeah, you take Paul's.
Well, I think,
Paul's been good, actually.
Where's the duct tape?
I believe we have, with the mass transit component, an opportunity to address one of the biggest issues facing the country right now. We heard it very thoroughly discussed in Dallas. I was at a luncheon yesterday and heard Mayor Reed talk at length about it. And each presidential candidate constantly is referring to this whole thing of equity and opportunity. That one of the things that also came out of the Dallas trip, there is almost a perverse amount of wealth that has been created in Dallas, yet they remain one of the poorest cities in the entire United States of America. Both of those things happening concurrently. And one of the ways I believe we can create opportunity for people is providing adequate transportation. So one of the real benefits of what we will be proposing on this half-penny sales tax to the city won't just be the glamorous, shiny, new subway extensions or pretty light rail components, but it will be some fundamental improvements to the bus service. We're going to try to turn our bus system into the best bus system in the entire United States of America. Go away from the traditional, just the big one-size-fits-all, and smaller buses to get in and out of neighborhoods and vans and that sort of thing. More technology, working with the city and others to give signal priority opportunities to the buses, Wi-Fi on every piece of equipment, people feeling safe where they're going, more frequency at night, more frequency on the weekends, fewer transfers, all the things that give our current customers a more dignified ride, and the things that we want to do to reduce or remove the barriers from those who won't get on a bus currently. So I think we really want to push that.
We do have we do have folks from Fulton County here. Hello, Todd, and others who are here. What is your hope that Fulton County is going to also come in at the half penny or the quarter penny for the next 4 years and then a half penny afterwards?
Yes, we laid out a plan that would see about somewhere between $6 and $8 billion worth of expansion. And I love the way Heather framed it. We passed the first step of that, and that is to move forward on about $2.5 billion worth of expansion with the city right away. And hopefully the voters will agree to make that happen. But then in future years, we want to continue to do all the things we've been doing in terms of becoming a better transit authority that would attract even more partnership and so forth. So our friends from Fulton, Handicap, and maybe even further beyond, would also want to join MARTA. The one thing we won't do, and that's just part of, at least under my leadership, it will not be with us going out to places like Cobb saying, please join us. Please become a part of our system. We need you, that type of thing. And I don't say that with arrogance, but I say it with, we think we're a formidable and good business partner and a good investment. And if you don't think the same, then we'll wait until you change your mind, or we'll go elsewhere. But the days of MARTA feeling as though it needs to go on bended knee with to other places, we don't think those days. We think those days are behind us.
How about to the state? And I don't know if, I mean, is there ever, we heard yet from Bill Crane, what hope, what real prospect do we have that the state will become a full partner in MARTA? They certainly have benefited over the years from that.
Well, I'll let Chris touch on that first step of what the state's made.
So, last 2 legislative sessions ago, the state, I think, did step up for an initial step of $75 million in capital bond funding for transit. And so, in addition to the infrastructure bank, we're calling it the Go Transit program. But we submitted, opened up for a round of applications for that money, and we're on track for the SRTA board to announce those awards in June. But here, $75 million, if you go back and you look at the legislative authorization in the bill, this was not some long, drawn-out, highly restricted piece of legislation. It's one sentence, $75 million for transit uses statewide. And so we tried to model it.
And it's a one-time only bond?
It's a one-time only, but I would say this. I think it's pretty clear from when I talk to members of the General Assembly. They want to see how is this money going to be put to use. Transit, to your point, hasn't been something that's been a focal point in terms of direct funding at the state level. But I would say it's actually not entirely accurate to say the state hasn't been involved in transit funding. Transit
And operating, an annual operating.
yeah, but transit is statewide. I mean, there's rural human services transit, non-emergency medical transport. If you start looking through the state budget, you will find tens of millions of dollars, let alone in the match for those needs. And I mention it not to step away from the MARTA question, but I think a lot of this speaks directly to a lot of people hear transit and they only thought it was synonymous with MARTA. Yet you're looking for members of the entire General Assembly from across the state to understand the vision of transit.
Aren't there 120 transit systems or something like that?
About 120 transit systems throughout. And so one of the things that we're doing is trying to make sure everyone gets that message. But going back to what Keith was saying, MARTA has applied for funding from this money. In fact, all of the operators, obviously with the exception of the one I run since I'm administrator of the program, have applied, and we saw applications from as far away as Savannah and Chatham County. So I think that, again, there's going to be an interesting point to talk about with these awards and how this money is applied, and I think it's the beginning of a discussion.
The most dominant mode of transportation in the region is the automobile. And there are people who would say, why should we even spread it across the other modes of transportation when only 3% of folks in Metro Atlanta use MARTA or transit, and whatever percentage, ride bikes are on. Can y'all talk about, are we doing what we need to do to accomplish the transportation needs of our region, and why should we have them go across many modes, or should we? I mean, yes, Paul wants to go.
I want to follow on Chris's point, and during my time in North Carolina, where I was the Deputy Secretary for Transit, I had to oversee almost 100 systems statewide, and the hidden secret in all of that was that our rural transit systems were growing faster than any of our urban by a percentage basis. Smaller communities, and the big question of the state legislature was, how's that possible? And the reality was income and age. As you see aging populations who are on fixed income, and many rural communities where their economic mobility is stratified and at times compromised, they're dependent upon alternative modes to drive. That's a kind of hidden secret in the context of our changing economy and our growing state. And North Carolina and Georgia in that particular equation aren't a whole lot different. And Chris and I had long conversations commiserating over some of the unique challenges that transportation faces in both of our states. Coming here, what really was an eye-opener for me is that that same reality exists here in Atlanta, and in much larger measure. An aging population, huge challenges to economic mobility, and more importantly, bifurcation of our community, where the first step to riding anything other than in a car is to walk. And the lack of a walking, biking infrastructure that can even get us to public transportation is a big gap in our system, and is essential in order to actually make it possible for MARTA, bus or rail, let alone Beltline transit to work.
Is it understood that we need to get people to shift from riding alone in a car and to use either carpool or you know.
Can I-
Richard,
Can I
yeah.
also just address when you said, oh, only about in the state of Atlanta, 1% of people bike. And that's also by design of our transportation system as it stands now. I mean, for the past 50 to 80 years, we've driven one goal, and that's to be able to drive from your home to your location and end up exactly there in the quickest, most efficient way.
And have parking when you get there.
And have free parking when you get there. Not paid, sorry, Palm City Market. And we have done a miraculous job of that. I mean, there's nowhere really in the region that you can't get into your car and drive to that location, right? And if you can't, we hear a lot about it, right? If you're going to a football game or, oh no, I waited in traffic. And so by design, we have driven these goals. I mean, Spaghetti Junction is an amazing feat of engineering. And so to think that, we can't get to a point where we're supporting different modes at a much higher percentage, we just have to change the way we're directing projects, and we have to change, who we're supporting when we're making decisions on the transportation